Welcome to the Theory of DFS podcast. I'm Jordan Cooper, aka Blender at Blender HD on Twitter, the co-author of the Theory of Daily Fantasy Sports. It's a 15-hour audio DFS masterclass at theoryofdfs.com. Join with me this week because once again Eric is constantly tweeting out screenshots of his non-running back teams. It's Michael Leone, Two Hats One Mike on Twitter from Established to Run, formerly Daily Roto, and I'm assuming I see your tweets, and you're in those best ball streets as well. I wanted to talk a little. I'm not playing best ball. Eric's been trying to get me to play best ball.
I bet.
And Eric's talked a whole ton about strategy, and I think you're on board. I think everyone's as long as all I have to do to know what if you're in the know is ask how much exposure you have to Darrell Evans.
That's the secret password to get into the Best Ball Sharps Club. Yeah, Eric, he's either posting pictures of his non-running back teams or he's posting pictures on a beach somewhere, I feel like.
Why not both? He could do both at the same time.
I love it.
So how much Darrell Evans do you have?
I don't have as much as Eric. I'm probably about even. I'm not as high on Darrell Evans, so I might fail the. I have some, but not. He's not one of my highest exposed guys. Like I think Eric and the puppy had like 50% or something wild.
Well, go big or go home. Who knows? Who knows what's gonna happen? Hopefully, Derrick Henry gets injured in the first week, or training camp, or something. So for best ball, I know you're doing a lot of stuff for Established to Run. I mean, ETR focuses so much on all aspects of fantasy football, not just the daily game, season long, as well as best ball, and also the NBA stuff like you and Dink do. Obviously, like just like with the Top Shot stuff, like I'm very risk averse. Like I'm very big into seeing if the time is worth the money. Like I like that whole. That's why I like daily. Like DFS to me is like the best bang for your buck when it comes to predictive sports analytics or whatever you want to call it, or the game of it. That you could churn out. You could play multiple sports, multiple sites every day and churn out an ROI. So like my biggest bugbear towards like season long has always been like you do it once and like unless you're in like a million leagues, like where's the ceiling on that for the time investment? Now best ball seems to be the best of both worlds, only because once you draft, like there's no fab, there's no trades, there's no waivers, there's no nothing. My concern is the maturity of the ecosystem, and I think you probably share the same thing as Eric. Is you don't think that best ball is mature yet, and we could see from the structured drafting that's happening that there's a massive edge. This is more similar to 2012 DFS. My concern is what's the appetite to best ball once week one starts. Like, are there going to be like wait week 2 to the end of the season best ball? Like, what is your scope on the best ball ecosystem as a whole? Because we got Underdog, we got Draftkings, drafters. Some sites are better than others at certain things.
Yeah,
some has sharper players than others. Right.
Yeah.
So what is your take on the best ball ecosystem as a whole, and where do you think its ceiling is?
Yeah, I mean, I think this ceiling's absolutely massive long term, just because I think this is the way the majority of people might just start playing their season-long fantasy leagues. You know, they don't have to deal with waivers in season is a big thing. The most fun of season-long fantasy is the draft, and you can just do as many drafts as you want because you don't have to worry about setting those lineups come in season. So I think, honestly, we're at the tip of the iceberg where Underdog's this crazy phenomenon right now where I don't even know how many casual people it's reached. You know, some of these lower stakes tournaments they're running, like the puppy, you know, they had to, it filled in like 2 weeks. I'm trying to figure out how many people were in that, but it was an absurd amount of people. But it's kind of like these grinders that are like somewhat sharp. But when you pull back the curtain, I think over the next 3 years or so, we're going to start getting a lot more casual people playing best ball. And that could start becoming the more dominant form of how people even play season-long fantasy at all. And I wonder if we start getting more, I guess right now, essentially what you have are best ball leagues where you're just playing against, 11 other people and can you win your league or not? And then we have these massive tournaments like the Underdog Best Ball Mania, the Puppy, the Best Ball Mania for Underdog, $1 million grand prize, crazy top heavy. I wonder if in the future we start getting some tournaments that maybe like split the difference a little bit, give you a few more price points where it's not this crazy top heavy tournament, but because there's so many people playing best ball, we can offer different options. So that's what I'm hopeful of in the future. That's obviously not happening right now. If you're grinding best ball right now, to a certain extent, it has to be entertaining and fun for you. I mean, you're wrapping up your money for 6 months or so. And, it's not necessarily the best, like straight ROI investment you can make. You definitely have to enjoy it a little bit.
Right. But don't you think that the edge here is in those top heavy, or I mean, I know what you're asking for is like kind of like the $9 slant version on like DK, like
Yeah,
DFS.
I think
Like there's a
long-term,
milli,
I'd like to see
but we
that.
got the $9 slant. It's like, okay, that's not that. It's still large field, but it's not like $1 million to first, stake knives to seventh place type of thing. But don't you believe that if you're right and more casuals go from the season long standard model into best ball, they're most likely, obviously, going to be approaching it. And we see this currently, that the drafts that you'd make to win a 12-team league are not drafts that have, equity, very winning equity in these large field like super contests. So don't you believe that the edge lies for sharper players in those, like the large field stuff, because people and also they attract casuals as it is, because why do people play the millie? They could make a little bit amount of money and win a lot. So these 12-team leagues where you put in $5 and you could win 50% of the prize pool, which is what, $30. Like you may play a bunch of those, but like it's not as appealing. To me that's the double up, triple up version of DFS. So don't you think that if this does mature, that the edge in the large field stuff, that's where it's going to be. It's not going to be in $500 12-team leagues. Because I take a look at the season long product, and it's like anyone that's playing in any. I mean, I guess there are whales. I don't know. You could tell me more about that. Like, in order to get a decent amount of money down in season long, like you're playing against the sharpest people in the country, right?
Yeah, this is where I think season-long fantasy, there's still this edge playing high-stakes stuff where you'd be surprised at kind of the old-school methodologies employed by some of the higher-stakes players out there. And I actually think the edge is pretty good there, where honestly, the edge in Best Ball Mania at a $25 price point is probably higher than the edge in the Puppy, a $5 price point, where all these people that listen to Eric, listen to the ship chasing guys, have the ETR ranks, are flooding this $5 contest because they can. And this odd dynamic where I think that lower price points actually reduce the edge. But taking back to like your primary question, as if, basically the millie maker of Best Ball, which is what the Best Ball Mania 2 is, if that has the highest edge, I think it's very similar to DFS, where the Draftkings Millionaire Maker, if you're looking at pure edge, like that's the highest. Now your odds of actually achieving your true ROI are a lot more variant because it's so top heavy. Does that make sense?
Right. In fact, it's probably you don't have enough lifetimes in you in order to order to do that. Right. It's the main reason why I don't play the millie often, because it's like the only EV spots are like the top spots. It's like that's it.
Yeah.
It's like
and you're probably more plus EV in the millie than what you play, but you're gonna realize your ROI and your true ROI a lot faster in other contests, and you're less prone to the variance of it. So that's somewhat how I view it. I also probably differ from Eric a little bit in terms of our priorities, and like I'm trying to get as many teams through to the finals as possible, and he's trying to construct teams that he thinks are really plus EV once they do get through. And we're like probably not that far off, but I'm a little bit more on the way this tournament's structured with the 3 uncorrelated tournaments at the end and your points starting from scratch each week. I'm a little bit more on like, let's just get as many teams through as possible. And if that's your thought process, the way you're building isn't that much different than the way you would build it in a regular 12-team league. Like, I'm pushing the edges, the boundaries a little bit further, a little more extreme to try and get some monster teams. But overall, my structure isn't, vastly different than what I would do if we were just playing a 12-team regular league where I'm trying to win that league.
Yeah, but don't you think that you're sacrificing ceiling in order to raise your floor, which gives you more bullets to possibly win first? But don't you think that Eric is building lineups that, like, it's one of those things where, just like when I play 150 lineups in DFS, like, the goal is, I don't care if 149 don't cash, as long as one, like, wins first place.
Yeah.
But I know that in the process of doing that, I will have some slates where I lose 90% of my money.
I'd say the difference to me is that a week of DFS, we have a little bit, I hate to use the word control because we know how variant it is, but we have a little bit better understanding of what it's going to take to achieve that really high ceiling, to get one of those teams that actually has the potential. Whereas in Bestball, so much can happen. And again, it's like three separate DFS weeks at once that are 15 weeks in the future, that I'm just a little skeptical that we're actually building teams that have more upside versus. So if Eric got 30 teams through and I got 40 teams through, I'd rather have my 40, versus his 30. If we both got 30 teams through, I'd rather have his 30. But I think in general, I'd just rather have more bullets because I think it's going to be really random at the end who actually wins this. And the more of the skill portion of it is getting there. Now, I do agree with Eric with some builds where I am trying to, push the boundaries and have teams that when they hit are going to be, super monster teams. I'm also cognizant of guys. I think like Todd Gurley last year had a really good win rate in, hyper fragile teams that you only took 4 running backs. Todd Gurley had a really good win rate, but he was dead by the end of the season. Like, so I'm aware of those types of players that are going to lose value over the course of the season in a tournament structure specifically. Like, who cares if I got my Todd Gurley teams through because they're dead anyway. So I'm aware of it to some extent on like the archetypes of players that I'm drafting. And if I'm drafting an RB early team, maybe in a 12-team league, I'd take 2 to 3 early and 4 total. In Best Ball Mania, maybe I'll take 1 to 2 early and 4 total and really push it. But ultimately, I don't see like a massive difference in the way I'm building, a traditional league versus the Best Ball Mania.
Are you stacking less then?
No, well, that's the thing is I think the stacking helps. So there's definitely an additional benefit to stacking in Best Ball Mania because of the tournament weeks, but I think that gets a little bit muted over the 3-week course. But I think stacking is plus EV even in a regular 12-team league because we know there's a strong correlation among teammates over the course of the season. And then you add in the added benefit of just the way the distributions of multiple stacks on the same team work together over weeks. Like, hopefully those are just, you're running pure and those are lining up well. Your Carolina stack hits 1 week, your Tampa Bay stack hits the next week, and you've got a better chance of that happening versus if they're all random uncorrelated players. So I'm still pro stacking, but not to the point where I'm sacrificing a ton of value to do it. I looked at stacking research last year, and stacking by and large was better than not stacking, which we know makes sense. It's pretty intuitive, but there was a break-even point where you started to give up a certain amount of draft capital that not stacking was actually better than stacking. Now, that was just for winning your 12-team league. So that break-even point might be a little bit different if we're talking about our EV in this large field tournament where we do have 3 playoff weeks, and that stack might matter a little bit more. But I still think you want to be careful about not pushing your stack too far. And I think Eric and I are somewhat in line with that. He's talked about trying to get really good value on some of your stacks. He doesn't want to just complete a stack. He wants to complete a stack where he's getting really strong ADP value in conjunction with it. And if you're super flexible in drafts, there's different ways you can kind of open up different avenues for you to create stacks throughout the course of a draft. So you're a little bit flexible, you're a little bit more malleable. You're not tied to just one stack, and that lets you kind of take those gambles on, I drafted DK Metcalf at the 2-3 turn. I don't have to take, Russ at 4-5. I can let him fall to 6-7 and things like that. If you know you have these backdoor outs, and also understanding that the quarterback in a lot of ways isn't as critical to the stack as you would think at first glance.
The thing that interested me about Bestball is, which is why I wanted to care more about what the ecosystem is going to look like, is reacting to people that overreact to news or underreact to news. Like, for instance, for most people have the same amount of information that are playing that from an ADP level about the same. Do you believe for these? And I'm not talking about the 12-team leagues. I'm talking about these massive tournaments that, like we saw last year with Tyreek Hill. Do you believe that if for whatever reason, like as I've said before on Twitter, I don't pay attention to NFL until the Thursday before the first the DFS slate. Like, it doesn't matter to me. And the DFS, who's on what team? I don't know. Julio Jones, he's on the Titans now. I know that, something like that. That once a player is undervalued and then moves dramatically up the ADP charts for these large field tournaments, doesn't it make it intuitively, I'm assuming analytically it does also, it makes no sense to draft them anything worse than his past ADP, because those teams structured like we saw last year with Tyreek Hill possibly getting suspended or whatever happened last year, and Tyreek Hill is getting drafted like as a flyer in like the 12th round, and then like he's fine, and now he's getting drafted in the second and third round. It's like, is there a point in ever for the now in a 12-team league, you could beat 11 other people, but for these large fields things, if Tyreek Hill is let's say the WR1 on the entire season, like how you you're unlikely to beat teams that draft him in the 12th round to win $1 million or whatever the first prize is, than drafting if you're drafting him in the third round, you almost need him to be the WR1. And if he is, like, the other teams are going to be so much better.
Yeah, it's this weird. You actually, I'm 100% with you. You would actually like not want him to be the wide receiver 1 if you were the person who took him in the third round, because then that would mean all of these 13th round Tyreek Hill teams are getting through, and you're competing against all those teams. You'd really need to thread this needle where like some of those teams didn't get through, but then Tyreek Hill maybe had a really good playoff run, and it'd be really hard to pull off. So this is one of the biggest distinctions between what I will, this is an example where I will be very different in my 12-team league than the tournament. The example this year is Darrell Henderson with the Cam Akers news. Cam Akers is out for the season. A lot of people, got Darrell Henderson in the 10th plus round, even later. Even if I think Darrell Henderson's a 4th round value right now, I can't take him there, because if Darrell Henderson has a really good year and helps my team get through to the playoff rounds, all these 10th through 12th round Darrell Henderson teams are getting through to the playoff rounds too. And now I have to beat them, not just them collectively, I have to beat the best of those teams 3 straight weeks. It's a really tough hill to climb. And that's where you got to channel your DFS mindset. It's kind of like if you made 150 teams in DFS, and let's say in the slant, in the DraftKings slant, and you got Darrell Henderson at $4,500, and then DraftKings changed his price to $6,000.
Right.
And I've got to make my teams. I don't care if he's supposed to be worth $8,000. My $6,000 Darrell Henderson teams aren't going to beat your team. So at that point, I just have to fade Darrell Henderson if I want to be plus EV. It doesn't matter what his value is in a vacuum. So I 100% agree there. You have to be pretty aggressive. And the thing is, too, you're in a 12-team league. There might be a few people like you who understand this dynamic and let Darrell Henderson slip, but there's not going to be 11 other people that let him slip. Someone's taking him too early. So I won't, I've only drafted 30 Best Ball Mania teams so far. I'm going to have a ton in August, try to get to the 150 max, and I won't have any more Darrell Henderson. I won't, if for some reason he fell to, the 8th, 7th, 8th round, where maybe it became like less of a difference, I'd consider it, but that's likely not going to happen. So it's almost moot.
Does this also mean that is there an edge now on the teams, on your Darrell Henderson type teams, but when Cam Akers was healthy, that you're taking someone like Xavier Jones, like whoever the back, like whoever the zero RB guy that when Darrell Henderson gets injured, doesn't increase the edge. That if you're not going to take Darrell Henderson now, that if you're in the 15th, like the Darrington Evans, don't take Darrington Evans in the 15th round like people are doing. Take you're trying to bust you're trying to bust essentially two types of Darrell Henderson teams: the guys that got him in the 10th, the guys that got him in the 3rd, and you're taking a guy in like now the 12th or 13th round that benefits when Henderson gets injured.
Yeah, 100%. That makes a lot of sense. It's something I haven't been doing enough. I have to mix in. It's hard because we don't really know who the bet is, but because we don't know who the bet is, the cost is basically free. Before we had Cam Akers, I tweeted this earlier today, we had Cam Akers going at the 1-2 turn and Darrell Henderson going in like round 11. Like that's a lot of draft capital. Now we've got Darrell Henderson going in round 5 and Jake Funk and Xavier Jones going for free. The draft capital devoted to this situation has completely cratered, which means there's an opportunity somewhere unless they make a significant signing, which right now it doesn't look like they're going to do. That's sort of the thorn in the side of the Xavier Jones flyer strategy. But with what knowledge we have to this point, it makes a ton of sense. It's just leverage on leverage. If Darrell Henderson's going to be in the winning lineup, like you're going to lose anyways to these 11th round Darrell Henderson teams.
Well, unless you have the 11th round Darrell Henderson teams.
And those teams you've already drafted. So moving forward, it makes sense you basically double down your bet against Darrell Henderson. I can't draft him because if he does well, those teams are going to beat me anyways. So now I'm thinking, okay, if I can't draft him, the scenarios where he busts are the scenarios where Xavier Jones, Jake Funk maybe do a little bit more, whether it's we're wrong about how the role's distributed or Darrell Henderson just gets hurt.
To me, this is the more interesting part. This is why I asked about the ecosystem of I'd be more inclined, because like you said, Bestball, you're drafting now, you ain't seeing your money for 6 months. But I wouldn't mind it as much if I could draft, and I know what Eric's doing is like he's drafting some early, some middle, some late, so he has different types of teams because the information will change. But I'd be much more inclined to be like, okay, I could draft some in July, draft some in August, draft some the week before week 1, but then also draft week 2 teams that go from 2 to 17, 3 to 17. So now that we get more information because we see in DFS, we'll see. I mean, look at how people overreact in NFL, right? Someone will have a good game week 1. Someone will have someone out of the blue will have a 28% target share as a wide receiver 3. And it's like, oh, I guess maybe they're the number 1 for that team. And then the next week they have a 9% target share and he's 5,200 and he's 22% owned because people are like, have that 1 game sample size. I view that similar to Bestball of like, I would love to be able to take advantage of those situations.
Right.
And even though they may not be able to have $1 million contests for the week 2 Bestball, but if it's going to be the type of thing where the ecosystem just craters, that once week 1 starts, Bestball's over. You got your teams, and no one really cares much about Bestball anymore to actually draft. It's like, I'd like to have that type of strategic edge for much longer, so at least when I'm investing my money, I can be much more diversified.
I think you're going to get like one crack at that. I don't think you're going to get it from week 2 to 17, week 3 to 17, but you might get it from week 5, like because they need time to fill these tournaments if they're going to be like anything of decent size. But we might get something that's like weeks 5 to 17, after the first month of the season.
Right, so it takes a whole 5 weeks to end. So it's not like every week they have to fill something.
Yeah, but what'll happen is similar to what Eric's doing, drafting at different points during the summer and having different information. You could probably have different information, like that contest will be released maybe week 2, even though it doesn't start until a few weeks later. Like that's what they do with the playoff contest. So you can draft with different information after week 2, different information after week 3, but it will be a part of the same slate. I think this is me guessing. This is as big as Bestball has been, so we don't 100% know what they're going to do in season. I'm trying to think back to what they did last year. I know for me personally, I did kind of forget about it after the season started, but I suspect we'll get at least one pretty big in-season tournament. I'd be skeptical if we got multiple of those at different 1 or 2, like kind of if you split the season in quarters.
Right. I know when when people are doing bad at DFS, when on Sundays they're mentioning their Bestball teams.
Yes,
Right. That's always the
that's the
sign.
move.
Whenever I see a tweet at 6 o'clock, it's like, oh, McCole Hardman had a touchdown. It's like, that's going well with my best ball teams. I know the person is dead in DFS.
It was a losing week for sure. I have been there too many times.
Uh, so the ecosystem in best ball, like Underdog, obviously, from what I could tell, has the best interface and format and tools. And from what I've seen from DraftKings, it's not. But the difference, like you mentioned before, Underdog seems way sharper.
Yeah.
How much of resources do you think platforms like DraftKings, FanDuel that are dealing with sportsbook stuff, like Bestball is on the 60th level of their priority list. Underdog, this is what they do. Even drafters, it's a little bit more towards that. That it comes down to do I play on the site that makes it easier for me to be more efficient and devise strategies better, or go to the place that may be ridiculously much more softer? Even though I don't have it's gonna be a much more manual process, and it's not as intuitive to draft as you would on Underdog.
Yeah, that's where it's been difficult for me because I've mostly played on Underdog. The ability to do slow drafts on Underdog in the Best Ball Mania, like you said, the interface is so good. I never miss a pick or anything. Whereas if I did one slow draft on DraftKings early in the season and I didn't get a notification after the third round, I auto drafted half the team. And not only that, but their queue system's a mess. Like Underdog will remove Cam Akers right away. You can't draft them. DraftKings, you get timed out, you're getting Cam Akers in the draft. He's still up there on the ADP. So if you have the time to do fast drafts, it makes sense to do those on DraftKings. Like if you can carve out times to do fast drafts in general are softer than slow drafts because people are on the clock. They don't have time to think through decisions. It's a game on the fly. So fast drafts right off the bat are, I think, more plus EV than slow drafts. And then if you do it on DraftKings where people can't upload the ETR rankings, like people on Underdog can just in 2 seconds upload the entire ETR rankings for Underdog. You can't do that on DraftKings.
But what edge do you have in doing that, though? Like if you were to upload the ETR rankings and auto drafted, like, do those teams even have
well, not if you're auto drafting.
Right. Well, but so you're using the ranking just so you have something there, so you're manually putting in.
Yeah, so you're not missing.
Right. What I'm trying to say is like it's very similar to DFS with, I'm gonna subscribe to a site for projections and then press the 150 button with nothing else and just give me the top 150 median lineups that have no correlation or any type of ownership considerations. Like you have to think that people do draft.
Yeah,
people do it in DFS.
Critically. I think you're better off using the ETR rankings as your base than you are the straight ADP on Underdog.
Right.
But it also is like self-fulfilling to an extent where if enough people are doing that, that's going to push the ADP and influence the ADP. So that's not going to happen on DraftKings, which is nice if you have your list up, wherever your rankings are, whether it's ETR or somewhere else. Like that's going to be very different than the default DraftKings interface. Like you're going to find a lot more values, and just because they're not high up, especially in a fast draft. So I've had a hard time though because I just really haven't had time to do fast drafts. So I'm mostly doing slow drafts. The site I've played a lot on is FFPC. They have a higher price point tournament, and it really fits the way I draft well. And I think the ADPs aren't as sharp as Underdog. So for me, that's been a good middle ground between DraftKings and Underdog, is playing the FFPC $125 entry tournament. I've been doing a lot of those.
How long does it take to do a fast draft?
Like 45 minutes.
Ooh, 45 minutes. That isn't that long.
It's not that long, but if you want to do a substantial amount of them, like it adds up.
Right, but you have to use your whole 45 minutes.
Some of us can't tune into football the Thursday before the season, okay? We've been grinding football for months, getting content out, okay? So I do some fast drafts. I'm just saying it's hard to do a lot of them. Like if you could make that as high as percentage of your teams drafted as possible, like that's the most plus EV from like just a straight money standpoint.
Right, because okay, I see what you're saying. By if you enter a whole bunch of, like, let's say you enter 10 slow drafts, you could enter 10 at once, and different times it'll be your pick. Yet with a fast draft, it's like you can only do one. Like, you can't sign up for multiple because you have to stick. You're basically paying attention for 45 minutes straight because it's going by this quickly.
Yes.
So
yes, and I think Eric even posted he tried to do like 5 puppy drafts at once, and like, he burned 2 teams. All it takes is one missed auto draft pick and you burn a team. Now there are people I'm sure that are, you can multi-table a little bit, maybe do 2 at once if you're really on top of it. But yeah, it is a hard distinction, and part of it depends what you're trying to get out of it. If you really are just trying to straight maximize edge and you have the time to devote to it, though, DraftKings, your edge is going to be higher. Like, the teams you can build there are going to be way better than the teams you can build on Underdog, especially for an overall type contest.
Okay, so let's go over to DFS now, because once I heard that 45 minutes for a fast draft is like, that's too much time. It's like, let's go to DFS where you can take almost no time to do anything, right? But let's go to the easiest thing. Last year, I mean, you're on a bunch. You're on a bunch of shows normally, right? ETR. You're getting drunk with Pete Overzet on picking teams and whatever. One thing that you harped on, or you've at least focused on last year, from what I've seen and heard, is that you focused, and Eric, very very similar to Eric, on these smaller field, higher stakes DFS contests, similar to like the luxury box, right? Like those, even the Thunderdome, right? That's the smallest high stakes types of contests where overstacking and, you don't need to get everything right in order to win those. The overall theme, if you want to have one theme of this podcast, since me and Eric started it last October, is it's my kind of like it's, I don't know, cognitive dissonance. It's my issue with the fact that the smaller field stuff has, like, you would have to agree. Let's just get it out of the way. Playing small field contests in DFS and playing large field contests in DFS are almost like 2 different games.
Yes, I would agree with that for sure. And it's sometimes really misunderstood. The things you should be doing in small field are sometimes what people think you should be doing in large field, and vice versa. So it's really an interesting dynamic.
Or the ways to be contrarian in large, like a lot of times I say that I'm actually more contrarian in small field than I am in large field. And I like, why would you be more contrarian in a 200 person $1,000 contest than you would be in a 290,000 entry, whatever? It's like, well, the amount of dead money there is in the such large field, like the players that are high owned, they're still over owned, but they're nowhere near as over owned as they are in the small. Like playing Derrick Henry at 28% ownership in the large field. Maybe you believe his efficient ownership is 24%. Well, it's still close enough, and he's still the highest projected running back. So I could still build plus EV teams. But if you tell me in small field he's going to be 48% owned, it makes it easy for me to just X him out. And like, it makes it like you're just making it easier for me to not play those guys and still play a high projected team. But that's where the issue comes in, Mike, that the smaller field contests have sharper players. So like the floor of your lineups, like, are the floor of cashing, of winning in the smaller field stuff is much higher than the larger field stuff. But if you just took a look at just purely the dead money, yes, like you said before with the large Bestball contests, realizing your EV is the hardest, is the number one challenge of playing the large field contest. Getting the EV is the easy part. Like I could build 150 plus EV teams, no problem for the milli. The problem is that I'm going to need 700 lifetimes or and a $70 million bankroll in order to survive realizing that EV. Then in the small field stuff, like even in the SPY, which is for like 4,000 entries and $100, whatever, like the average strength of a lineup is way higher. There's much less dead money in there, but it's easier for me to realize whatever I may have less ROI, less EV, but it's easier to realize. That's to me, that's the conundrum of like every time I go, I focus most of my DFS career on large field contests because that's where I come from poker. I'm like, I want to go to the easiest table possible. Give me 9 schmucks. I don't care that they're raising, and I don't care. I'll sit there and wait for ace king, and I'll wait for the premium hands, and then make more money than I should on them. I have no problem doing that, or taking advantage of weak tight tables and running them over. I have no problem with that. But then you look at a game where, like the high stakes poker, a lot of times it's played shorthanded. It's 6 people at a table, and it's 5 of the best players in the world and 1 rich businessman. And it's like that one rich businessman pays everyone, but it's like you have to battle 4 other sharp players in order to try to get his money. That which is more worth it. It seems like your attitude is that there is enough of an edge the way that you play for smaller field contests, and I think Eric echoes this. That that it's weird to say some of the more known, sharper players in the DFS ecosystem are playing so much and so wide that they're not focused enough on the individual contests that you exploit that. And while they make it up in volume, you kind of go in as a sniper and go, well, you know, if half the Thunderdome field is going to play their cash lineup in it, how do I exploit that?
Yeah, that's 100% the dynamic is. And as the contest gets higher stakes and smaller, in a weird way, I think my edge actually increases because more people are just playing their cash lineup. You know, Empire Maker makes probably the highest in terms of expected scoring point lineups. He probably makes the highest of anybody in all of DFS. But the Thunderdome to him is, you know, that's
1% of his volume.
1% of his output. For me, I'm sweating bullets, man. So for him, it's 1%. So if there's other people like that and they're just throwing their cash lineup in, I'm playing against 30 people who are playing cash lineups. They're all playing the same way. You know, if you were playing against a poker table, even if the players were all really talented, if they all played the exact same way, you could probably take advantage of that in some way. And that's what I feel like I'm doing. Like there are times where there's 3-team dupes in a 30-man field. Now this is getting extreme. So I'm talking Thunderdome 30-man field. I mean, more realistically, people are playing like even like 200, 300-man. There was like a $400 contest. I forgot what it was called. Maybe the Juke last year that I liked a lot. But I mean, there were 3 teams duped in a 30-man field. That's 10% of the field that has the same lineup. Like you're plus EV almost on that alone. And then, God, one of the weeks I did well, it was the week that people played Zacchaeus from
right.
Atlanta.
Oh yeah, I remember that, and he fucking did nothing. And he must have been like 60% owned and like whatever.
60% owned. There were 3 60% owned wide receivers that week. You know, like there was a week Robbie Anderson was 60%, and wide receivers just volatile. And it's not that these were the wrong picks. Like in a vacuum, they were probably the best picks, like towards the optimal lineup. But I can bet against failure. And then you mentioned like the risk of ruining these tournaments because there's definitely going to be weeks where you're just dead. You know, the chalk hits in a certain way, you're dead. But there's also going to be weeks where you don't necessarily bank, but Zacchaeus fails. Your min cash equity is probably not as bad as you think it is. Like might not be as all or nothing these tournaments than you might be thinking. Because if Zacchaeus fails at 60%, I don't need to beat that many lineups or do that well to just hit the min cash barrier. Like obviously I want to win, and I think the motto if you're playing any small field tournament is win the low scoring slates. You know, those are the slates you want to win. Can I win with the lowest score possible is sort of like a challenge for me sometimes. But yeah, I think your floor, I don't want to say your floor's higher, but I don't think it's as shaky as you think to like be able to reach that min cash level, because when the chalk fails, you don't need to come anywhere near hitting the nuts, you know, to get a lineup in there. And that's the thing with correlation too. If I'm in a small field tournament, 200-man tournament, I can overstack to an extent because I know I don't need to hit the nuts to win, right? I just want to reduce the amount of things I get right. If the game goes off, I'm okay if I took, Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen, and Irv Smith, right? Like Justin Jefferson goes nuts and Adam Thielen and Irv Smith just do okay. Like I'm fine with that. I got two guys that didn't bust and I got one guy that went nuts. That's fine for me. You do that in the Millie Maker or even the slant, you're probably dead, right? You need to hit a ceiling.
People do that, but the thing is, the weird thing is that typically adding correlation to your lineups increases the variance of the lineup. I mean, like that's same thing for relative value when it comes to playing lower owned players. Like you're increasing your likelihood of winning first place or last place, right? By doing so. But the thing is that the other thing that people don't take into account is that the field size gives a lot more permutations of lineups that are available. That like in the Thunderdome, when Khalif Raymond he's 0.8% owned in the Millie Maker, and he has 200 yards and 2 touchdowns on like 2 long plays. Like he's more likely to be in the winning lineup in the Millie Maker as a one-off. Who knows? Someone misclicked the button or someone has him. But in the Thunderdome, it literally doesn't matter.
And that's one of the things I was saying where people have it backwards. Like they think they need to stack more in the Millie Maker, like more correlation. There's a point of diminishing returns, as you noted, as the field size gets bigger. There's a point of diminishing returns with the correlation where like your odds of 3 guys on the same team hitting a 75th percentile ceiling are increased together, but the odds of them all hitting a 90th plus percentile ceiling, it starts to actually reduce. And You need all 3 guys at a 90th plus percentile ceiling if you're going to beat 500,000 other people. If you need to beat 199 other people, you just need a lineup that has like a couple breakouts and a bunch of guys that don't bust, and you're fine. Or just outscoring the busts that half the field has. Derrick Henry has, one of the biggest weeks I had last year was Derrick Henry was 40% owned in the juke against the Jaguars week 2 or whatever. He scores 9 points. I've got Aaron Jones at 10% owned. He scores 40 points. Like obviously that type of thing doesn't happen that often, but you're almost winning tournaments off that alone, right? Like when you're in small field. If you're in the Millie Maker, you still need a lot of other things to go right. If I'm in a small field, that's it. Like I had a great week. I really would have to mess it up for me to not cash pretty highly on that alone.
Right. Like I had a big week when Mixon had his like 4 touchdown whatever game, and he was like 5% owned and whatever, because someone else was the more owned running back in that range. And it's like what else do I need? And typically in the large field stuff, I play 3+1s. Like what I find in the large field is that obviously the 3-man stack, which is the quarterback and 2 pass catchers, makes sense when the second pass catcher is cheap. Mm-hmm. So it's not Cousins, Thielen, Jefferson. It's Irv Smith. It's like the tight end or so, like the chances of the 90th percentile on 2 7K wide receivers, like the Godwin plus Evans type of like I never made those because they would have to put up 60 points for that to for them to be the highest score. So to me, it's that 3-man stack with the core, because you want the quarterback to be the highest scoring quarterback. So most likely 2 of their pass catchers put up ceiling scores. But then what people don't do in the large field stuff enough is do the run back. Like to me, you'll see the 3-man, but you may not see the +1 of the receiver from the other side of the game in that. So to me, that's the most optimal way of playing, like the slant or the Millie or stuff like that. But then in the smaller field, you almost want to play. I mean, you could play 4+2s and 3+3s, and you could essentially say, what game do I think is going to score the most points?
Right.
And just who cares? I mean, like I'll take Cousins, Cook, Jefferson, Thielen, Smith, and then play one receiver from the other side. And like that's my team. And as long as the Vikings put up 45 points, I win.
Yeah, you do a game stack and then maybe one high leverage pivot. like the mix-in thing. You know, you do a game stack, one high leverage pivot, and then just maximize your points on the other guys. And to your point about the double stack, we just released an article on ETR, how to win the Millie Maker, which, you know, it's very easy to win the Millie Maker.
Right, just read the article and you won it, right? That's it.
And you won. But the field played double stacks 29% of the time last year.
What do you consider a double stack?
Like two wide receivers and a quarterback.
Okay.
So two pass catchers and a quarterback.
So I call that a three man.
So it's the 3-man 28% of the time, but the teams that finished top 100 in the Millie Maker did it 40% of the time. So a lot of leverage there. And same thing with the bring back. You know, the field's bringing it back about a third of the time. The top 100 teams brought it back over half the time. So not only does it hit at a high rate, but it's hitting at a much higher rate than the other teams, which is most important. Like, you're getting positive leverage on that in addition to it being a good idea. So, yeah, the data definitely lines up with what you're saying there.
So you're looking at past. I mean, I've never discussed with your process or anything, but I mean, do you play NFL DFS more by regressing past data or running simulations on current data?
I play it. Can you repeat that again?
No, like your analysis for that, for instance, is we could look at last year and then see what the top 100, but that's much different than looking at week 1 before it happens and go, well, based on our range of outcomes, based on, you know, some type of percentile projections, or you're doing obviously like game play simulations and you just ran the content, you just basically run all the games and then run the contest and then see what, you know, based on assuming your ownership and your player projections are reasonably accurate, then seeing, well, based on our simulations for week 1 before it happens, you know, 28% of the teams would be here, but 35, like, is that part of your process on a week-to-week basis, or are you thinking more? Because we see so many articles.
It's a little bit.
My only bugbear with why I'm saying it is that we look at a season of NFL DFS and go, well, that's a season. And it's like it's 17 weeks. It's like the sample size is so small that last year could have been an outlier that certain types of things happen, but like I want 10,000 slates, but there hasn't been 10,000 slates. So I view the value of, yes, it's nice to see what happened in a 17 slate sample size, but to me, it doesn't mean as much as people. It's more likely to be correct, but you shouldn't that's like the stone nut lock.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, we looked at the quarterback data. Like, we did this article last year, and the quarterback data would have said we did this article last year for 2017 to 2019. And the quarterback data would have said, go cheap at quarterback.
That didn't work last year.
No, you had to adjust quickly. You know, it was a new dynamic. The way the NFL is changing, there's higher ceiling, more predictable ceiling, and there's just more guys to beat up top at quarterback. So you have to adjust. So I do a little bit of both. Like, I do some simulation stuff to kind of get the odds of, you know, Derrick Henry hitting certain points. Like, if I know he's going to be mega chalk. I look at the past data just because I think it is important to understand what your opponents are doing, you know, because there is like a point where double stacking would be a bad idea if it was being done too much by the field, right? Like, at a certain point, it'd be negative leverage if the field was overly double stacking. So I like to have a sense of what my opponents are doing. I'm looking at past data for that. But really, the way I'm approaching the small field tournaments is, again, like, it's really simplistic, but I'm trying to find out what's my highest edge scenario of the week and how can I take advantage of that. And that's not always the same thing. One week it might mean there's a stack that's going to be under-owned, or maybe not even under-owned. I just think there's a stack with an incredible ceiling, and I want to figure out how to build around that stack. And if it's a little bit chalky, I know I'm going to have to get some leverage elsewhere. Another week might be, oh, wow, this running back, Derrick Henry's going to be way over-owned this week. I know I can leverage it with Aaron Jones. Like, that's my edge this week. I want to maximize that. So I'll build, you know, a pretty regular team around that. So I'm kind of just trying to hone in on where my edge is, and I'm using the past data to help me to do that. I'm using some simulation stuff to help me to do that. I'm not at the point where I'm simulating like a full slate and I'm simulating exactly what the field's going to do, and I'm saying, okay, this lineup spits out as the most plus EV, I'm just going to play this lineup. I'm not quite there. It's a little bit more feel-based, I guess.
I mean, but conceptually you're there. I mean, you're doing that. You're doing that in a manual. What I mean,
Yeah.
you're doing it the same way I do it, right? Like I'm not running those things, but I mean, conceptually, I'm thinking of it that way. The thing that
Yeah.
separates me and you is that you're able to you and Eric, you're able to come up with the one choice. That's the thing that I could look at a slate and go, there's an edge here, there's an edge there, there's an edge. Like I could see where all the edges are, and then when I'm playing the $9 slant, I'll be, well, I'm going to take advantage of this by playing 80 lineups, and some will
Yeah.
go this way, and some will go that way, and some will go. But I can make the same EV lineup that has Derrick Henry and the one that doesn't have Derrick Henry. But I have both of them. So to me, I don't care if Derrick Henry has a good or a bad game. I just wish it's one of the two. I actually don't want Derrick Henry to have an average game. I want it to be either 40 points or 9 points. And I have all those types of lineups. And then when it gets down to making my single entry like teams or like the power sweep or something like that, like to me, I put that at the last part of my process. When like I've been trying to work on that with like NBA and MLB. So like in MLB, I'll say, okay, I'm making a $250 ball 4 team. And I'm like, I think the biggest edge is fading this pitcher and stacking against him. It's like, okay, I'm going to do it. But knowing in baseball, the variance is so high that you're going to miss so often. Just to get me in the mindset of being able to where, like, to me, that as a large field multi-entry player, I mean, I also play cash games. I could play a cash lineup, sure, but I know that's negative EV in those contests. But it's just getting that mindset of like I got one shot. What's my best one? And then the regret of like I think there are two big edges on this slate. I think this one is slightly better. And then the one that you also thought of, that would have won. And it's like, well, I don't have to worry about that because I'm playing 100 lineups. So like I have that lineup also.
It's a different mindset for sure. I do though. Usually I'll play like 5 or 6 teams, right? So I'll hedge a little bit. Like if I have 2 things I think are big edge, I'll split them up. Maybe I'll put them together in the same lineup, or like I usually play about 6-ish teams. That's about my sweet spot for the amount of teams I'm playing. Now, I generally have one team that's lopsided in terms of the money I have out. If I'm playing the Thunderdome, or even if I'm playing, the $1,500 luxury box, that's usually an outsize versus, I'm playing 3 teams in the 777, or I'm playing 3 teams in the 400. And you just have to live with that. I mean,
yeah, but at least you're playing a couple of teams. I do that also.
Yeah,
so I'm playing a couple.
It's not just one team though. I'm not playing the same team in everything. I know sometimes the people that play small field play the same teams in everything. I don't play the same team in everything. I am trying to get good at one of the things I think I did too much last year was I was finding a lot of my edge cases in like individual leverage spots, and then I'd really spread out my stacks. And I'm trying to get to a spot this year where I'm more comfortable being heavier on the stack, if that's really what's, I think is driving my edge, is the actual stack and the ceiling of that game, even if it's going to be owned, and just knowing the different ways I can get different around it. I think a lot of times I hedged too much on the stack portion of things, and then I was really heavy on the individual leverage portion of things.
Right, because you don't have to hedge. I mean, like, if you're playing 5 lineups, you don't have to hedge. Like if you decide...
hedge is probably the wrong word.
Right, like, to me, it's a matter of identify different... Like, if you identified these 2 games are going to be under-owned, and I could overstack them, and if that means that I don't have Derrick Henry in any of my 5 lineups, then that's what it is. But it's a matter of finding the edge. Like we're trying to be edgelords, right? You're trying, right? I don't know. It's kind of you don't know which edge is going to be the best, but you have a couple of these, and the way that it worked, like to me, that's not hedging. That's hedging would mean playing one stack and then playing the complete stack against like the lineup that, like you take a look at one lineup and go, if this lineup succeeds, this lineup fails. Like that's a hedge. Like both games could go off. I mean, like it could be that you target 2 games and they both go off for 60 points, just that one scores more than the other, and so be it, right? It could be that Derrick Henry fails or doesn't fail. You have him in all your lineups, or you don't have him in any of your lineups, But you're not. But if one lineup works based on Derrick Henry failing, having a lineup with Derrick Henry in the next spot, all you're doing is diversifying. You're not like you don't have to do that. Like some people think they have to do hedging, but to me, it's just then you're playing above your bankroll at that. You shouldn't be playing the step down in contests and then just choose the best one rather than like don't play $1,000 lineup that fails when another $1,000 lineup succeeds, because like then just go down to the $500 contest and play one of them.
You have to be willing to accept weeks that if something happens, you're going to lose that week, whatever that is. If you're wrong on your edge case, you're going to lose.
You're a bad edgelord.
And that's
can we just call ourselves the edgelords?
The edgelords. And to your point too about having a couple lineups that aren't necessarily hedged but diversified. Sometimes in these small field tournaments, you can be off on ownership quite a bit. You can think, especially in the really small field, a guy could be, you might think he's 30 and he's 60, right. It's a big difference. So
or the other way around also, Mike.
Yes.
You could see a guy like, oh, he's going to be like 10% owned in the millie. And then you play the luxury box and you're like, he's 2% owned. And right? It's like you and two other people have him and that's it.
That's where diversifying lineups, even in small, if you only got 5 or 6, makes sense, because right off the bat, when the slate locks at 1 p.m., one of those lineups might be way more EV than the other for something that you were just wrong on ownership wise.
Do you adjust in those types of situations for the 4 p.m. games? Like how much do you play in, especially in the smaller field stuff? The late swap. Now, obviously, there's an edge there. I mean, to say 0 is going to obviously the wrong answer, but just in the case of when you know much more about ownership, like I think that to me that's the most useful times, where you have like, let's say a couple of chalk pieces, you may have them, but you know about what the ownership is going to be, and then maybe 3 high owned guys in the 1 p.m. games and 3 high owned guys in the 4 p.m. games. But then you look at like, oh, well, this running back that I thought was going to be 28% owned ended up coming in at like 15% owned, which means the running back from the 4 p.m. game is going to be way higher owned than I thought. And maybe you have him in the lineup and you're like teetering and you're like, well, you could plug him in min cash, or now that you know that you get much more leverage by not having them, now you rearrange your lineup and try to win a small field contest that way. I mean, obviously we're talking about stuff that most people don't do, but how much do you do it?
I do that quite a bit. I mean, the small fields, that's a really big edge, because, I mean, if you're playing the Millie Maker and you reach some of these decisions, a lot of times you're dead anyways, right? Like someone on your team didn't do well. I mean, you can maybe save some min cash equity, but if you're in a higher stakes tournament, well, first of all, that min cash equity matters a lot more, but 2, there's like more routes to surviving that and actually winning a tournament with someone who's cold early. And it's also easier to determine, as you said, when ownership's lock, you can back into what people have a lot easier in a smaller field tournament, especially the people that you're competing against. And if people are throwing those straight cash lineups in these tournaments too, they're not going to go in, they're going to change their whole lineup or none of their lineups a lot of the time. They're not going to go in and individually change. I have 5 to 6 tournament lineups. I can go in and individually change each one based on the tournament I'm in. So I had 1 week too. Sometimes I'll even plan ahead. I had 1 week. The 1 week I did really well, finished second in the Thunderdome. I took Antonio Gibson and I think someone from the Lions early, and I really leveraged against some chalk running backs early. And I knew if I hit, I can stack. I think I'm remembering the week correctly. I might be combining weeks, but I can stack this chalky Bills Arizona game at 4 p.m. if I hit early. If I don't, I have to get off of it. I hit early, and that gave me the confidence to stack that Bills Arizona game, not caring about the ownership because I already got my leverage. Now I'm just maximizing my points at this, point in time. Whereas had both those games been at 1 p.m., I might not have won that week because I might have galaxy brained myself out of playing the Bills Arizona stack because the ownership. But knowing that I would have that information ahead of time, allowed me to start with that Bills Arizona stack and have the freedom to get off it had my leverage plays not worked out early, which quite often they don't, and you do have to pivot.
And these types of strategic decisions it's weird to say, they're easier to make typically in the higher stakes, smaller field contests because your opponents are more predictable. They don't make mistakes, but they're more it's similar to poker, right? Because the whole trope in poker is that you can't beat 3-6 or something because no one respects your. I'm going to move up where they respect my raises, type of thing. It's like no, you want them to call when you're getting the best of it. Like, and if they draw out on you, then so fucking what? It's plus EV. That's what you should be doing. But in the small in the larger field stuff, like we had that week last year with Tony Pollard, right?
Yeah.
And like playing large field stuff, like once that news came out at 11:30, like
Smash.
I smashed it, right? Because but the thing is that in the smaller field, higher stake stuff, you have to expect Pollard to be much, much higher owned because there are much more observant opponents. Now, I'm not talking about that specific case, but when it comes to late swaps and determining what lineups to play and how to exploit that, like it's not like the type of thing where like based on the ETR projections, this guy is popping. It's not like that the rest of the field is this guy ain't gonna go unnoticed, right? But in the larger field contest, sometimes you get guys that are popping in the blitz or popping in ETR that end up coming in 8% owned in the Millie Maker. Because it's like the only people that are on them are the people from like the people that have the 2 projection sets. And that's about it. But in the smaller field stuff, like all those, you're not going to find many people that aren't at least aware of that information.
Yeah, I think that Pollard example, I think I told Dink to lock him on FanDuel that week. And meanwhile, I'm in the DraftKings live final and I didn't even play him. And I actually got the ownership a little wrong there.
Did you not play him because you thought he would be over-owned?
I thought he would be over-owned, yeah.
What did he end up coming in that contest?
He came in at like 30%. He was fine.
But you thought he would be mega like 65 plus, something like that.
Yeah, or somewhere in between at least.
And in the large field, I think in the large field he was like 12% owned or something.
Yeah, and on FanDuel it's usually even
more because the contests are softer on FanDuel also.
Yeah, they're softer. So that's where you can really push your projections is like the late news. You can push that in the large field MME. And sometimes that's a pain in the ass, quite frankly, because there's nothing worse than like, oh, I got this projection right. I nailed this, but I didn't play the guy because I thought he would be owned too much. Or maybe he was owned too much and it just is what it is. But so there are things that at times are easier to do in large field, which is sometimes slamming the best plays if it's like late news. But sometimes there's things that are easier to do in small field, which is, again, like you said, these chalk guys aren't as owned in the large field. So sometimes it's harder to find the break-even point on them, whereas I'll just know chalk running back A is going to be over-owned and, the 100-man
wide receiver du jour at 3,800, right? It's whatever, right? So you're going to get a Jalen Ray. Oh, this guy's out and this guy's out. And everyone just assumes that this guy's going to just get 28% target share. And it just turns out they play 7 wide receivers.
And it's just easy to systematically each week just not play that guy, because he's going to be 25% plus owned. Whereas to your point, like he might still end up 8-10% in the Millie Maker. And that's a huge difference. Like that's a really, really big difference.
Especially when it comes to the wide receivers, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Those because the cheaper wide receivers lead to really chalky build types. So do you view in the small field stuff, I do this in basketball a lot, is that a lot of times my lineup is purely contrarian because I go just whatever the opposite of that build type is, I'm just playing the best lineup of that. So when we see in NBA, sometimes some guy is out and we have a $4,700 power forward that is going to, instead of getting 27, we have a Bobby Portis game type of thing. And it's like, he could easily just foul out. Or they could run Ilyasova. They could change their rotation a little, and maybe he still only gets the same rotation. He ends up being like 65 to 70% owned. And it's like, well, a lot of people, like especially on like the Roto Grinder shows, they like, he's going to be chalk. What's the pivot? Right? And go, what other 47? It's like, no, the goal is to not play a 4,700, a 4K range power forward. Your goal is to play Julius Randle that slate. right? So if people are going down, if the construction in NFL is like, oh, over 20+% own on these two like 4K wide receivers, it's like, well, this is the time to play cheap running backs and expensive wide receivers and just play the best of that lineup. And if those cheap wide receivers don't do well, it's better than trying to find another 4K wide receiver that outscores that 4K wide receiver, because you're really not being all that different in your lineup as in a whole.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I do that quite frequently. You also have more outs, right? You know, if there's a chalk 3,500 receiver, if he fails miserably, you're obviously super happy, but he could also score 15 points, which is good on a per dollar basis. And it doesn't matter that much. You know, you're on a completely different build. You have a lot more. Whereas if you're doing the pivot thing you said, now all of a sudden you need your $3,500 receiver to score more than 15 points. And even if he scores 18 points, it's like, wow, you picked up, 3 points on the field. Like it's not nothing, but it's not a big deal. So I do that quite often. It's also another thing that's a little easier to do in small field, because you do get that obvious cash build each week that you can work off of.
You mean the collusion build? The secret chat build?
The collusion build.
The secret chat build.
Guys like, I know one week I got Travis Kelce, stupid low owned. I think I might have been the only person in the Thunderdome who had Travis Kelce. That type of dynamic you can just not get in a large field tournament. Like there's certain players, especially the high priced, high volume players, they might be under owned, but they always come with a base amount of ownership in large field tournament. I feel like, I don't know, maybe I'm off. You play large field more than, whereas sometimes in the small field, because of the one type of build, you can get one of these, like a Devontae Adams type, at like a huge edge to the field, just because there's not as many iterations out there. People aren't running through their combinations as much. They're hand building more, and they're all hand building the same type of lineup. And you just know they can't make any iteration of this lineup with Devontae Adams. It just can't be done.
Right. It's a lineup construction issue. I mean, I do very much the same in MMA. I know you probably don't play MMA DFS. No. It's very binary, because there's only so many combinations that there could be. So like on a 13 fight slate, you're pretty much, there's 26 fighters and you're not playing fighters against each other. But people don't realize what people do is they do the same mistake of like, well, I'm going to play the high price favorites and low price underdogs, but instead of the chalk underdog, I'm going to take the other underdog. Like, and it's like, well, your lineup still looks the same. Said, why don't you do that lineup but just leave 1,000 on the table and play the mid-range fighter instead? It's like, yeah, but I want to play the high. Like no, you'd rather be different.
Everybody does,
right? You'd rather be different, and then people don't take into account like what is the like in MMA. Mike, you'd love MMA. But if you like the leverage stuff, because it's all binary. It's not like NFL where like one team, whatever. It's like, well, if this guy wins, then this guy loses. So like if the high price, like this guy's going to be 52% owned, so I'm just going to play his opponent who's 9% owned, because when the chalk fails, the 9% owned guy has the seal. Like it's like directly there.
Yeah.
And then you could make the lineup construction that's the complete. Like you could literally look at the chalk lineup and go, I'm going to play the 6 opponents of these guys. And you're literally flipping the entire lineup. Now, you may not do that in like every lineup or something, but it's so 1-to-1. But that's essentially for like the small field GPPs. Like that's what to me, that's what I tried it. Like to me, I look for everyone's going to be on this running back. I'm going to play the passing game. Or everyone's going to be on the passing game. So I'm going to be on the, so like I'm not saying, because people look at me funny sometimes when I play like the vomit stacks, the teams that have low totals that are really cheap. That's a large field strategy more than a small field strategy. But for the small field stuff, I'm more likely, if Dalvin Cook is 37% owned this week, like I'm playing the Vikings passing stack, because to me, I'm not saying the Vikings may have the highest total. I'm not saying that they do badly. I'm just saying they don't score their points the way that everyone thinks they're going to score their points. And to me, that's more valuable in small field than try to bet on the Lions with a 16-point total being the top stack of the slate. Like that's a once in a blue moon thing that I'm going to shove in the milli maker or the slant. But in the small field, a lot of times I'm really just looking at the top 3 or 4 team total type of teams and just going, well, everyone thinks this, and I'm gonna do the direct negative because only one person can score the point. Well, only one person on the team could score a touchdown. So it's like, oh, if everyone's going to the passing game, everyone's playing the cheap stack. Clyde Edwards-Hilaire's in my lineup, right? Like that, like those types of lineups. Do you consider leverage like that, or are you looking more positionally, like you said, with the everyone's going to play Henry, I'm going to play Aaron Jones?
I do it a little bit more positionally, or like we talked about, just kind of flipping the build. So if I have a really direct leverage piece, I'll make it like Aaron Jones over Derrick Henry, or flipping the build where I just won't build with an expensive running back, and I'll be pretty different than the Derrick Henry teams because none of them have Devontae Adams, and I have Devontae Adams and somebody else. I like where you're going with that. Sometimes I have a tough time that where I'm like, I'm still trying to survive Dalvin Cook being okay, right? And I don't want to get caught in the middle where I took kind of like
you'd rather overstack in that. So what you're saying is you'd rather have a lineup that, like for instance, we use the Vikings because like last year they were so condensed,
so concentrated,
right?
Yeah.
So like, I'm the type of person, like my mentality comes into if let's say Cook is high owned, I'm in the power sweep or something, which is not small field, but the smallest field that I would play. I would play the Viking stack, and I would play one of Jefferson or Thielen and with Irv Smith, or maybe all three. Who knows? You're more likely to play in the small, like the juke. You'd play both. You'd go like Cousins, Cook, Thielen, Smith. Like you'd do something like that, where you're still playing the chalked out Cook.
Yeah.
But you're still betting on the entire Vikings offense. So if Cook only has a 12-point game, well, you still have 8% owned Adam Thielen with 30.
Yeah.
Right.
Or I'm just hoping to survive. Like sometimes or maybe I'll just fade the offense entirely and kind of, I try not to get too much in the mentality of, okay, this team has a high team total, so we have to take someone from this team. I think sometimes we just want to bet on maybe the offense coming in a little bit lower than that team total, maybe stuff spread out in a way that nobody really kills you, sort of thing. So I'm betting against Cook. Like I'm fading Cook. He's the chalk piece. The offense is moderately successful. Cook doesn't kill me. He scores 18 points, whatever, it's fine. Even if he scores 20 points, it's fine. And I've just got a completely different build. Sometimes I'm thinking of it that way. I do get in trouble sometimes where in these contests, I know the ownership's going to be really high on a handful of players, and I don't know when to stop getting leverage, where I'm like,
you're fading all of them at once. Right?
Yeah. I don't want to play this guy at 50% owned. I don't want to play this guy at 50% owned. I don't want to play this guy at 50% owned. So sometimes I do get in trouble where it's like, okay, you shouldn't probably fade them all. Even if they are all over-owned in a vacuum, probably shouldn't fade all of them at the same time. That's something I'm trying to work on a little bit more, where I'm just like, well, I'll take the leverage here. I'll take it here. I'll take it here. And then you get to a point where there's just a diminishing point of returns. You already have enough leverage on the field.
So you'd rather
that's
maximize,
tricky to know, though.
Right? Because what you're doing is essentially you're sacrificing more projection, even though when you don't need to. I mean, like you already have enough leverage to win first place. Like once you have enough of that, you should be now maximizing for projection. And if the top projected lineup for you to build has a 63% on Christian McCaffrey, then why shouldn't you? I mean, that's why? Because you're gonna look, even if you use like an optimizer or whatever, use Excel or whatever, like you'll see your range of outcomes like go down, but your chances of winning first place like stay the same, because it's like in a large field. In large field it'll start going up, but if you're playing a 400 person contest, like once you get like beating the field by 27 points doesn't do you any good. I mean, like coming in first place like by 27, like, oh look, I lapped the field, like the 27, those 26.9 points, like you didn't need them. Like you didn't need that much leverage. You don't want to have to bet on 3 coin flips to fail. Like you're just betting on 2 of the 3 to fail. It's just a matter of which 2 are you fading. And the difference between me and you is that I'm playing all those situations, and you have to find the one, right? That's the hard part of like I know that I shouldn't, out of these 3 top owned players, I'm only going to play one in a lineup. to build 3 lineups because I need to fade to the other 2, and so I know I could build 3 separate lineups like that. So what you're saying is that I should just play 3 high stakes contests, small field, and not just
like you said, it's like lower your stakes a little bit. If you need to play 3 lineups, then play 3. But it is funny because Dink and I do this show, Establish a Million, on Saturdays where we talk through our GPP process, and he's the large field guy. So there are times
right. You probably have conversations where like it's like, oh, I like all of it. I'm just going to play all of it, right? And Dink just plays 150 of just all different types like this.
Dink can just set a rule on the optimizer that says max 1 of these 3. And I'm here pulling my hair out trying to determine which one. And there are sometimes flip arguments where I'm like, well, I'm fading this guy because he's going to be 60% owned. Good luck figuring out what to do with him in large field tournaments. So it's funny. There are some things that are easier and some things that are harder.
But long-term edge-wise in DFS, when it comes to this small field, large field stuff, you have to at some point you have to agree that that at what point, I think the exploitation that we're talking about is primarily due to the fact that a lot of sharper players at high volume are not building for contest types. So a lot of times they may be building 150 lineups as a whole, and then putting their top projected or whatever way they rank them. This one goes into all of these contests. This one goes into all of these contests. The top 20 goes into 20 max. The top 50 goes into. They're doing something like that. When a lot of sharp players have automated processes. So we're dealing with people that are running simulations, are running their own projections, doing multiple sites, doing data scraping, and all that type of stuff. Is the next level. Like, to me, all of the reason why I win through game theory is due to the fact that I use publicly available projections, publicly available ownership, and I'm using these concepts based on people still having this information and just using it wrong. When does it get to the point where you're going to be playing the Thunderdome and you're not going to be playing against cash lineups? I mean, I always explain that the reason why these sharp players, because it sounds like if they're so sharp, why are they playing their cash lineup in the Thunderdome? It's like, well, because it only represents 1% of their volume, so they know they're it's not like they don't know what they're doing. They're sacrificing that for the more raw money. It's very similar that people will look at, like, for instance, in baseball. Not as much in football, but in baseball, sometimes, because there's so many different combinations and stuff, I end up with, like, in a 150 build, my bottom 10 lineups are just brutal. Like, are just like it, the way the combinations went, like, it's too low projected. Like, it's just the way that all the combinatronics work out, it gives me 10 bad lineups at the bottom. The problem is it's 703. Yeah. Right? Like, I need to upload something, and I can't, I have 10 bad lineups. And people would look at those lineups and go, how did you build 10 bad lineups? Like, in order to get me good 140 lineups that are good, I was willing to sacrifice 10. So I think that's more of when we see the high stakes, high volume players in the luxury box of the Thunderdome, it's more of they know that they're sacrificing, 1 to 5% of their lineups that aren't necessarily the best for winning those, maybe min cashing, but they're making so much more raw money and everything else that so be it. We're kind of like we're kind of like feeding off the bottom. But at what point is that where those guys are going to be more, where the edges get small enough everywhere else that's the next thing of like, well, I need to make sure my luxury box lineup is in my cash lineup, and then where does our edge go then from there?
Well, that's where we hope that these people that are playing, $100,000 plus a week aren't listening to you and me because they don't have the time for it. So
no, they listen. They just from what I've been told is that it's not it's time
just not worth their time.
It's just not worth their time, right?
Yeah, and I know for myself, like, I could be plus EV if I MME'd too and played large field. In theory, I could be plus EV, but I have to keep my focus on, like, one particular thing. If I get stretched too thin, I start to make worse lineups for both. And it's probably like that for them, where if you're a heavy cash player, like, you really have to focus on making the best possible lineup that week, and you just have the bankroll to throw this in. So I'm not too concerned short term. I guess I should say, I think I'm confident that I'll be able to spot it when it happens. just because how similar lineups people are making. It's going to be like the deviation is going to be more between the individual lineups. We're going to get less of these 60+ owned percent receiver. I guess right now it's so far away. I mean, when you're talking like 60+% owned wide receivers, like
right, it seems
really,
so far away.
We're pretty far from the equilibrium. The other thing too is these high stakes lineups too have guys that just have, the whales that have big bankrolls and they want to play, and you'd be surprised, even in the Thunderdome, out of 30 teams, there's 3 to 4 that are pretty suspect. That's 10%.
Mike, you'd also be surprised at how some of the more known entities in the DFS space are actually not actually good players. To put it lightly.
So you get 10 per, let's say you got 10% of the field that's playing just bad lineups, period. And then even if the other 25 are playing pretty good lineups, but half of those are very similar and like have extreme ownership costs, I just feel like I'm playing a game right now where I'm not competing against 30 people. I'm competing against 15, kind of. And if I'm beating those 15 people, I'm doing really well. And the odds of me finishing somewhere in the middle of those people are pretty low. Like I'm going to beat all those 15 teams or I'm not. So there's some variance there, but it's like I'm playing less teams than there are in the field, just the way they're making lineups. So we'll see how it evolves. I'm hopeful, we can get another year or two out of these small field tournaments staying the way they are. I know there's some people that just aren't going to change. They're just playing so much money that they're not going to change.
Empire Maker ain't going to change.
Yeah, he doesn't give a shit. Like, I mean, and there also are some players right now too that like Empire Maker's probably like he's plus EV in the Thunderdome because his teams are so good. I think he'd be even better if he tweets some things. But
did you have his side on that last year's Awesemo versus Empire Maker challenge?
I did not take a bet on that.
Oh, I took a losing bet only because I thought Empire Maker was like a -115 favorite, and he gave me +125. So I said, "Fuck it, I'll take it." Right?
Yeah.
But once I saw Alex's lineups, I knew I made a mistake.
That was kind of how that was how I felt a little bit too, where I thought Alex had the better GPP theory, but
not for a 10. What I said was, if this was 100 slates, I would make Alex the favorite. In 10 slates, Empire Maker was only because he'd min cash more often. But I thought that Alex went too heavy. I understood his lineups at the end because he needed to bink. Like, I mean, he needed to whatever. But he had that Edelman team. I'm like, what is that?
That was an Edelman team early on.
Right. I looked at this. I looked at projections. I'm like, this is. I look at the lineup and I go, this is a large field GPP lineup in a contest that has like 17 people in it. So I'm
right. Like he went a little bit too far with it. I remember that week. So I had a similar kind of experience, like taking that contest in as you. But yeah, like Empire Maker, he's plus EV. He's not going to care. He's not going to change. If I get 3 to 4 people like that don't care, if there's 3 to 4 people, or I should say 3 to 4, I'm like thinking of the Thunderdome, but like even like expanding that to the luxury box, which is 150, 200 people. If you can get around 5% of people that are just making bad lineups and another 15% of people that are just making cash lineups, I think you're in a pretty good spot. And I feel confident those percentages are like where they are. Because even if you go down to the $400 juke, people get tight when people who are, let's say, we've talked a lot about people with big bankrolls that don't care, but the people with smaller bankrolls that do care, they play tight in these tournaments when they should play looser.
To me, Mike, I've always said I think that's the biggest edge in all of DFS. In general, people that play too safe. It's very similar to poker. Like I make most of my money off of when I played off of weak tight players, where they're essentially showing me their range like every single hand, and I could play perfect poker against them because they're not aggressive enough when they should be, and they're too tight when they should. I mean, like, but to me that. When I say dead money in large field GPPs, like you said, 5% of the lineups are just like you're like, this guy isn't even in the league anymore, and they're in their line like that. Those types of lineups, like 5% of.
We don't quite get that bad in this.
Right, I
field,
know, but I'm saying, but ones that have like almost no min cash equity, right? But then we get 15 to 20% of lineups that are like that are cash type lineups that are like, oh, like I mean, literally, especially in NFL, if you put in the ETR optimal, the blitz optimal, the roto grinders, if you go around the industry to all the projection sets, and I mean, I've tested this before. I get sick of doing it because it takes a little too much work of going to each place's final projections and just running 150. I could find all of those lineups duped.
Right.
Right. I mean, like as if someone just went and just pressed the button for 150. And then I could also do it with like the stacks as long as a quarterback and wide receiver are together. And I could find all of those and they're massively duplicate, and it may be a slightly different defense, right? They're all 1v1s and they may be duped 6 times, but like that encompasses like 20% of the goddamn contest. Like, and these are people that are using tools, and I'm like, so that's the type of stuff where I look at it's like I'm using the same information and I'm not building those lineups, and I could predict those lineups. Like other than the downside of it's a pain in the ass to try to realize your EV in large field contests. It's like going to the World Series of Poker. There's 6,000 people playing, and you look around and you're like, there's 3,000 people that are like, does a flush beat a full house type of thing? And you're like, and then you look at it, a tournament that's a 3-table tournament with like all the top players in the world, and you go, well, why aren't I playing against the 3,000 schmucks over here? But I know against the 3,000 schmucks that some guy will push all in. I'll have, kings, and they have 9s. They hit a set, and I'm gone. I mean, I have to win those types of things, the like 400 different ways to get to first. Yet in the 30-person tournament, it's like, yeah, I'm playing against better players, but I could predict their play, and I could realize my smaller ROI much better. See, to me, that's been the conundrum of this is the 43rd episode. Like almost every it comes up like every other episode, depending on like especially Eric who plays small field, but I know that you do play small field. When I'm talking to other large field people, like where I feel like oh we're in the same boat together. We both see each other. So I get mesmerized. I think you get mesmerized by Dink because he's able to play all these lineups, and I'm sitting here going, how could you decide on just one? Like, does Drew say that to you sometimes?
He doesn't really. Yeah, I mean a little bit. He's not so much worried about like how do you decide on just one, but he really likes to be able to make these very logical rules and understand that like over time making these rules he's going to win more money than he's going to lose. Like we did the running back example. Just play one of these 3 running backs. Like he likes to be able to do that very structurally. And just knowing you're making sound teams that over time you're going to win more than you lose. I think his frustration stems less from like looking at what I'm doing and thinking it's a little bit simpler and more from just the top heaviness of the tournament.
Right. Well, of course. Right.
I know
we want it to be flatter.
He had like his top 1% finishes last year was well over 1%. Like it was very good, but he had a stretch where. I mean, if a couple 7th places are 7th instead of 1st and 2nd, that could be your whole year.
That's what's going on in MLB for me this year. I have 17 top 20 finishes, and I'm down money. I have a 2nd place finish in there, and I'm still down money. And then in NFL last year, my November and December were awful. Just absolutely awful. But when you bink the slant, the 3rd week in October, wildly profitable. If I compare my NFL seasons, like if you look at just the finishing positions and everything, you'd be like I shouldn't have been up. I shouldn't have.
Right.
And if I look at my MLB season this year, it's like why aren't you up $100,000 instead of down 10,000? Because it's like my top 1% is like 2.2%, and it's like where's my money? Where's my money, bitches?
Where for me, the small field stuff in a way too, it's just more enjoyable for me. I don't know, like
it's enjoyable. To me, that's more stressful.
I don't know. I got pretty stressed. Like running, optimal lineups with my rules, and then making sure my exposures were where I wanted them, and then rerunning on news and stuff. Like I feel like I'm a little bit more fluid, and I'm a little bit less stressed under the gun making like 5 to 6 hand-built teams.
I just
I
look.
don't know.
I look at one lineup and go, okay, I got to pick one. And it's like, well, I mean, I'm playing 150 lineups into this $9. I'm picking them all. So it's like, as long as one, they're all not correlated to each other. They're all diversified. They're all, if it comes, this, they're all correlated and everything like that. So if this game goes off, I got it something here. If that game gets off, I got something there. And now you're telling me it's like, okay, here's a $1,500 entry, right, which represents like a fifth of my entire volume on the slate, and it's like, do you choose Joe Mixon or James Conner, like some 6K running back? And like, I know I had to play one of these guys, and I think three of them are under-owned.
When it goes right, though, it feels so good when it goes right, because you kind of know you're going to get paid off. Like large field MME, you don't know if you're going to get paid off necessarily, right? Like your edge case can hit, and it's still you don't
have the perfect lineup. Field,
yeah,
right. I think that's the tilt that you don't like, that I've gotten used to. Like if you've tried to play, people out there, if you play 150, it doesn't have to be 150. A lot of lineups, because it happened to me on MMA this past weekend. I had a good MMA week because I won the 555. I tied with Empire Maker, of course, but whatever. In the 555, that I built with the right strategy. I built 100 lineups, all leaving like tons of money on the table. Purposely faded a couple of under on a couple of guys, over on whatever. The winning lineup is because obviously you have to play MMA like Showdown, right? You need the nut lineup, and if you don't, it's going to be tied 74 different ways. And the lineup that I built 100 lineups that looked exactly like the optimal lineup that won $100,000 solo. It just so happened that I built 100 lineups like that. I just didn't happen to have that one. Right. To me, that may be the tilt where strategically you could get all the edges and say, here are the three or four biggest edges. I'm going to make 150 lineups like that. And unbeknownst to the stupid people that think you could cover all your bases, you can't anywhere come close to covering all your bases on 150 lineups.
No, you most definitely
right.
cannot.
I thought all of this I got everything perfect. I thought all these under-owned guys went off. I just didn't have that combination, right? You look, and some doofus defense scores 34 points at 2% own. It's like, yes, I have 5 lineups with them, but I don't have them with the other guys. And you're looking and you're going, you're looking at the Millie in 58th place, going,
right.
I built the right way, and then you lost money. Like, you got everything, quote, everything right, and you look and you lost money.
Yeah, that's a tough feeling.
But to me, that's less of a tough feeling than I built one. I knew the 3-4 spots to go, but the one lineup that I built in the $1,500 contest wasn't the one. The one that I built for the $12 single entry one was, right? Like that. Oh, great! I got $400 there, but I lost $1,500 in this contest. It's like you got to get that one lineup right. But I guess people do it. So there are more people that play a single lineup or 3 lineups than they play 150. So maybe I'm weird because I get so many questions, right? In single, right? Because people ask me single entry, do you play this guy or this guy? Which I always hate those questions. But
yeah, it's like, those are so tough.
Right. But the point is like, well, the projection versus leverage, obviously in the first part. But the main thing is that, like, don't put yourself in that situation. Just like, well, play one in one lineup and play one in the other lineup. It's like, well, I only want to play one lineup. Like, I don't want to play one lineup. This game is way too varied for me to play one lineup.
Gotta have a little bit of gamble in you, I guess.
I have gamble, but it's like picking one. Like, if you're gonna pick one stock to go up 10 points today, and that's it, and that's all. Like, pick one. I'd rather spread it around. So I don't. Is that a bankroll management thing? I mean, I know I know you guys with Holka and Pete. Like, how? Here's a good question. How was that? The mentality of what this is what I felt from you guys, because I know you guys won, so you had all 3, Joe Holka, you, and Pete Overzet. I feel as if you're more willing to accept risk for the reward, but you're still cognizant of like some type of bankroll management. I don't know about Holka, but it seems like Pete treated it like it was free money. When I expected it to be the other way around. I expected Pete to be the one, since he doesn't really play for a living, to be like, well, we want all this money. Let's pocket. Let's take a bunch of money off the table and then like play with house money. And it seemed like Pete was more of the let's play this every week and let's double down and like.
Well, once you experience winning a small field tournament with a team that's not that good, like you get a little irrationally confident because you're like, wow, I can win these tournaments and make mistakes. I mean, the week we won early on, also it helps when you win early in the season, like you did with your slant. We won the 1500 early in the season, and we did it with a 0 in our lineup. You know, we took a chalk Troutman at 0 at tight end.
Oh, I remember that week. A good old. And
like being able to
he was 47% owned in cash games. I thought this was nuts.
Yeah, it was wild. But we survived it. Probably a little bit of a donkey pick. Joe is definitely on your train of thought where he's very worried when we do, like, let's say we do an entry in the 1500 and then 3 in the juke, that's 400. He is paranoid we're going to play the wrong entry in the 1500 versus the 400.
I'm not that paranoid. No, I mean,
okay,
I'm not that paranoid. It's more of the fact of I'm not even playing in those contests at all, right? Because I'm playing, like, my entries are going to be in the power sweep and the spy, like where it doesn't, like if I'm playing like on an NFL weekend last year, I was playing between like 7,500 and 10,000 in volume because I play primarily in cash games, right? So like 6 to 7,000, 7 to 8, like somewhere around there would be just in cash games. And then like, okay, well, $100 spy, $150 power sweep, like it's 1.5%, 1% of my total volume. Like, I don't mind. Yeah. Okay, what's the number one thing that I want to do this week? Okay, I can put it in there. So when it's the luxury box, that's 15%. Now it's more relative percentage of how much I'm playing than like the how much it is or how many lineups I have.
Right.
So I feel like if I'm playing 3 entries into the power sweep, there's 2 power sweeps, there's 2 spies, right? And they're not small. They're still like 3 to 4,000 entries. Like, I feel like, okay, I can make 5 lineups and not feel as if I'm that invested because it's only 5% of my volume. But if I was playing the Thunderdome,
if you're already playing cash and playing MME, at that point you've got a lot of bases covered. Why not take all those sweep entries at that point and put them into one 1500 entry and like really increase your odds of a super meaningful bank?
Why not do both? Maybe I'll do both.
Well, I mean, if you want to raise your bankroll, but
no, that's fine with me. I may do both.
I think you
may see me in the luxury box this season.
Just don't make smart teams. I'm gonna have to come on here and.
Well, I'm not gonna be putting my cash team in. You could bet me that. but with Pete, like with like the thing that like I know Joe is more like that, but why? To me, it seemed like Pete should be the like. Especially now that he quit his job. Do you think that's the difference though? Like last year, he was doing the bankroll challenge. But he still had his normal job. So it's like anything that he made in DFS was just like funny money. Like, do you think this year that if you do that, if you work together, he'll be much more likely that if you win early, it's like, let's just withdraw some of this.
I don't think so. I don't think if we lose early, like that's when people I think get tight. But when I think he's like me, when we win, I don't know. It's
the only thing that I could see him not withdrawing it is if there's a bit that's worth doing. That's the one thing I respect about Pete.
3 guys,
he'll do something for the bit
and then lose it all over the course of the season.
Right,
this is the bit. No, he's pretty risk tolerant, Peter. Joe's getting on our train of thought too. I think part of it is like you end up getting to a point where you have a pretty realistic shot of winning some super meaningful money if you can, if you bank a tournament early and you can run it up playing these types of tournaments. Because if you're playing I think the one we might have won was like a 50-person tournament. Like it's it's not that crazy. You win a couple of those a year. It's like 1 in 50. Like you're probably not going to, but like you could win a couple of those a year if you ran super pure. And I think there's this sense that when you're up, there's just these opportunities at these small fields to like have like a 1 in 50 tournament. Like you've already got a 2% shot of winning that tournament just based on randomness. Whereas if you're scaling back and playing in even larger field tournaments, I know the EV and the ROI is not necessarily different, but it's a little bit of a different feeling, right or wrong. It feels a little different.
Yeah, but they are two completely different games. The last thing on that note is that because of their two different games, I think a lot of the content. Do you believe that there's not enough content that distinguishes between the two? Because the thing that, like, we see these screenshots. This is what always gets me. To win a large field contest and to win the Thunderdome, no matter what the raw money is, it's much harder to win a large field GPP. Like you mentioned, you have a 2% shot at winning a 50-person contest just based on randomness. That because you can be wrong more, you don't have to be perfect. You don't even have to have a perfect strategy. You don't even have to have perfect projection, because common sense, I mean, most of projections, like I could look on an NFL week before I even look at any type of projection set, and I could look and go, this guy shouldn't be 3,800, right?
Yeah.
This guy shouldn't be 6,200. This quarterback shouldn't be 5,800. Like you just intuitively know, and because you know the variable, you're doing all that variable work in your head, and then you get to the projection, and typically it's close to that, right? You're not going to be, oh, I can't believe that this guy projects well. But like you're not shocked or anything that we get into this notion. Like I think this is where it's perpetuated more. That I mean, you're on my side. I mean, you do analytics for ETR. We're both numbers people. So the type of thing where like the watch the tape folks, like, well, in large field there's a lot of randomness. So some rando lineup could win. That's not a stack. That's random people. It's a negative EV lineup, but there's 200,000, 300,000 lineups. Some random fucking lineup could easily win. And in small field, lineups that don't have leverage or don't conform to much game, like Empire's Maker Cash lineup could win the Thunderdome. It's most likely the highest projected lineup, or one of the highest projected lineups. That gap between small field, large field, cash game, whatever, like it seems like people, at least the audience, from my view, treats it too much of the same, and not that these are completely different games. And if for instance, if you bink the luxury box and you just played the luxury box all year and you binked it 3 times and someone said, I'm building 20 Millie Maker teams, can you help me? It's quite possible that you can't build 20 good Millie Maker teams. Like the difference between what you play and what they play is so dramatically different that, like you said we said in the very beginning, the types of lineups that you're building are completely different than. So to ask, what are you doing? What does that matter? Like you need to be able to assess what they're playing, and then there aren't that many people that are the greatest at all different types of different types of formats.
That's kind of why I've like focused on what I have been, is because like you get more specialized and it's just easier to mentally focus on one thing. And when Dink and I do this show, I would agree, first of all, that there's not enough separation in general in the content. That's something Dink and I try to do a lot, and it works out naturally because he's pretty much doing all large field and I'm doing all small field, kind of like you and Eric have a similar dynamic. So it's a little bit easier for you to draw a distinction. But if you're just watching an average show, it's like, oh, this guy's a GPP play this week. And it's like, well,
what does that mean?
Well, yeah, what does that mean?
It just means not a cash. To me, I just view it as not a cash play.
Yeah. And
right, not a median lineup.
When a bad lineup wins the Millie, it's guys that you probably shouldn't have played because they weren't good plays. And when a bad lineup wins the Thunderdome, it's guys that you shouldn't have played because they were over-owned, not because they weren't good plays.
Right.
I laugh when I see the luxury box. If the top 10 to 15 scores are all really tight, like I probably lost that week, because it's just people playing similar lineups with a couple points of separation on some 1v1s. But yeah, I think we need to be more specific with our advice with this type of stuff. It is such a different game. And I even have times with the large field tournament where the chalky but not uber chalk players that, again, I said, like, for me, it's easy to fade in the small field because they're 60% owned and not 30. Like, I sometimes tell Dink, like, I don't know what I would do if I was in your shoes playing MME. Like, I don't know what I would play. I'd probably end up matching the field on
well,
most of these
if you're
guys.
considering yourself, if you're looking at exposures for a lineup set as a whole, but you'd look at this, but that's where the play whoever you want type of thing that I say, where it's like, yeah, is he overowned? Is he underowned? He's not overly overowned, and if he's underowned, he's not overly like he's close enough to efficient that you could play him, you could not play. I mean, like it's neutral, so it's like depending on the lineup he's in. You show me some chalk lineup that has the chalk that don't play Derrick Henry in that lineup. You show me some. I'm playing some vomit stack somewhere, and I'm playing up for Henry and McCaffrey that are both going to be fine in that lineup. But you have to show me the lineup first in order to determine that.
Yeah.
Now, in the instances, like you said, when someone is drastically under or overowned, you almost don't have to show me the lineup. You just say, like, they're so massively EV in a vacuum to play that I'd lean to playing more lineups with those guys. Doesn't have to be in every lineup, but if I had one line, if someone had a gun to my head and said, you have one lineup to play, right? I'm playing the luxury box, right? I hate playing that one lineup. But you're going to force, Mike, you're forcing me to. And it's like, who do you play? I'm going to look for the most massively plus EV single player and build my lineup around that.
That's what I like doing. That's the difference. Like, I like doing that more than I like saying, like, oh, 98% of these players are, roughly efficiently owned. Like, my brain has a tough time with that. That's why I do have a few weeks a year where I'll play MME, but usually it's because I see like a specific edge and I just want to go all in on it, where I feel like the reward's a little bit more outsized in MME than it is.
So you lock button people in MME.
But I don't play MME every week. I'll play it like two or three times a year.
When you do, like you legitimately lock people.
Yeah, I did it twice last year. They were both wildly unsuccessful because I was wrong. But I think it was Philly and the Rams. I don't know. There was a stack that I thought wasn't worth playing in the really small field tournaments, but I thought it had a ton of leverage and it made a lot. I thought the leverage I was getting made a lot more sense in large field tournaments than small field, and I just ran 150, game stacks of that.
Wow.
Just to
you're burning. I mean, you're burning. I mean, it's the type of thing where either you're not only gonna win, you're gonna come in second, you're gonna come in fifth, you're gonna come in eighth. Like
I don't know if it's the smartest thing to do, but that's how my brain operates, though. It's like
from a bankroll management, to me, it's not that there's nothing wrong with doing that. Like you believe those are the top plus 150 plus EV lineups. They just all happen to be 1v1s of each other or 2v2s of each other. The thing is that they're all the lineups are correlated to one another, which means your lineups are all going to be wherever they are. They're all going to be close together. So, like, if you're going to do that, typically, just like any financial person would say, that the more risk that you're taking on, it has to represent less of your less of your bankroll. So it's like, if you want to do, like, you could do that in general, but if you were playing 10% of your bankroll and doing that, I'd say you're going to go broke very quickly.
Yeah, and I'm not doing that, like I said, every week, but sometimes there is like an edge. Every now and then there is an edge case where I think this is a little thin for small field, but man, if it hits in large field, and this comes back to why I play small field in the first place, though, is I like to get paid off when I'm right. So that's kind of the, I find this edge case, I want to go all in on it, and if I'm right, I want to get paid off. If I'm not, I knew that risk going in.
Right. I remember tilting fucking overs at the year before with the fucking Lions and the fucking Spy or whatever. But that was the Marvin Jones 4 touchdown game, and he was like 2% owned in the Spy, and I had the Lion stack, and like no one was playing. But I had everything else around. Like people look at those lineups and they go, well, how did you choose the Lions? It's like, did you look at the rest of the lineup? Like it was chalks. Like essentially, it was like Alliance 3-man stack and like the chalkiest fucking guys everywhere else because I knew the Lions were going to be like 1% owned.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's not about the Lions. It's about how'd you make that lineup as a whole. And it just so happened, how could I play all of the chalk in one lineup and still be dramatically different? That's the way to do it. Sometimes it doesn't work out that way, but
yeah,
it just so happened to be the cheap Lions and it correlated with something else. And that's on a week-to-week basis. You have to figure. I mean, like we said, we're the Edgelords.
The Edgelords. I like it.
Do you want to be called an Edgelord? What actually is that a sexual term? All I know is that it's said on like 4chan or something. A person who affects or a provocative or extreme persona, especially online, typically used of a man. Is that really what it is?
I don't like it anymore. I don't know.
I thought an edgelord was something. Edgelord sounds something that you're in like a dominatrix in a dungeon somewhere or something. Is it not?
We're out of my realm of expertise at this point.
Oh no, it's someone in an internet forum who deliberately talks about controversial, offensive, taboo, or nihilistic subjects in order to shock others.
Oh, you're kind of nihilistic. Play whoever you want.
Right. So
that works.
Right. So are you not an edgelord?
I'm a little nihilistic.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're the edgelords.
I'm very nihilistic in season-long fantasy for sure.
Oh, in season-long. Oh, so you still play season-long?
Oh yeah, I like doing it. I mean, it's more
you like
fun.
the things that take too much time and aren't as efficient money-wise. So even with bet, so you're playing season-long. You're playing 700 slow drafts and Bestball.
I don't do a lot of season-long.
Do you just play like the main event or something and whatever?
I'll do like a few high-stakes leagues, like 3 to 5 high-stakes leagues probably, and usually I co-manage where I got help on waivers and stuff.
But I mean, from a long-term perspective, you have to admit that if you're using this purely thinking financially from a money-making perspective, season-long fantasy has to be like the least efficient way to make money.
Oh no, the edge is probably pretty big. You're just not going to make a lot of money doing it, but you can make plus EV bets and not have, if I do 3 high-stakes drafts, like that's not a whole ton of time.
Right.
And I think I'm pretty plus EV in them.
But if you had a choice, Mike, the 3 versions of the game: season-long fantasy, Bestball, daily, DFS.
Well,
and I gave you a $50,000 bankroll, but you could only play one of those 3 formats. Which would you play?
I'd play daily.
Okay, so there you go. There's the answer. See?
I mean, there's 17 slates a year versus 1.
Well, you also got the showdowns.
So yeah, and the showdowns.
And the Thanksgiving slate. And the Saturday last of the season.
That's one of the biggest differences, though, the amount of slates. Like the season long is 1 slate, even though you're only playing against your league. Like it's 1 slate.
No, I'm not saying to play one late. Like let's change the question. I don't know if you understood it. You have $50,000, but I mean, you could play 500 leagues.
I get it. I still wouldn't want to I wouldn't want to put all $50,000 on 1 slate. So even if it's multiple leagues, it's 1 slate, like one, Travis Kelce had an absurd year last year. Like that'll change the win rates dramatically. I mean, the same thing in DFS on a given week, but we have many, many of those weeks throughout the year to, but smooth that out a little bit.
But you could see from why you're answering the question that you have 1 slate, because Bestball's the same way. If they could make Bestball into where I could get 17 slates, I'd be more, wouldn't you be? The more sample size, the more we extend this, the more your skill advantage, perpetuates itself. So that's why I look at Bestball and go, if they could make Bestball where I could play not just 1 slate, like it would make it much more worthy of a investment to me, because it's money that would be coming out of what I'd be playing in DFS.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
2 hats, 1 mic. I'm assuming you've had that Twitter name for when did 2 cups, 2 girls, 1 cup come out? Whenever that
this was on a DK live show with David Kitchen and Al Zeidenfeld is how this came about. STL Cards. I think I stole his hat at some live event in which I was very, very drunk, taking over an open bar, and I was wearing 2 hats, and somehow 2 hats, 1 mic was born out of that live event.
We can follow you on Twitter there, and you're at ETR now. Obviously, ton of content. Preseason, we got the Hall of Fame game coming up. Who doesn't like some first week preseason showdown DFS for $500,000 or whatever's in the prize pool? So I'm assuming you're grinding the preseason DFS also, right?
I'm probably going to in some way. I haven't decided yet exactly what I'm going to do, but Cody does a lot of great showdown work. He's looked at the preseason past like Hall of Fame showdowns and stuff, and then Levitan lives for preseason DFS. This is his.
What's the shower narratives this year? Are there any shower narratives?
I don't know. I'm gonna have to find out over the next week. We only have 1 game this week, right?
Right. It's the Hall of Fame game, and then they start the right. It's only 1, and then then the week, whatever. But I mean, to me, it's weird to say there's more edge in preseason cash games.
That's what I was thinking I was gonna play actually.
I have to see. Maybe people wise up to how to play cash games for preseason, but all I know is that when I played them like 2 years ago, like it's almost auto wins sometimes.
Wow, that's crazy.
I mean, so as you look at you're playing I put up all these head to heads, and then I would look at the lineups and go, unless all these guys get touchdowns, like there's no chance you're going to beat me. Like because we all I mean because running backs and wide receivers aren't going to see the field often enough. Maybe the last preseason game, and then you also get 10% of the field that plays the guys that are literally not going to play, that are on the sideline in their street clothes.
Right.
But I want to see if that happens. Maybe that goes away, but who knows? But your ETR, establish the run. You could sign up there for it's the same crew. You got anyone new? I know Wiggins is still there for football. You got Silva. You got Corain went to NBC, and Corain went to formerly known as Roto World place.
Yeah, Crane's at NBC Sports Edge. We have Anthony Amico doing our dynasty rankings, filling over there now. Jack Miller's been doing some really good stuff, so I'm excited for the year. We've got a good crew. The main 5, I should say, for NFL are me, Dank, Silva, Levitan, Wiggins. It's a pretty good crew. We got all angles covered, so I'm excited for the season.
And when it comes to knowing actual football, I'm on board. I'm on board with that. But of course, I listen to the podcasts. I watch the shows. This is why I know something, right? Normally, if this was 2 years ago, I would literally have no idea who's on what team until like the Thursday before the first slate of the regular. I just like, what does it matter? Is there any slates going? I see the training report. Who cares? Patrick Mahomes had 3 picks in practice. Oh no, his ADP dropped. I hope that happens. So establishthерun.com. 2 hats, 1 mic. I'm Blender Ed, Blender HD, Jordan Cooper, the co-author of The Theory of Daily Fantasy Sports, which you can pick up at theoryofdfs.com.